Do you love the charm and nostalgia of vintage Valentine cards and decorations? Well, today I have 10 vintage-inspired projects that are perfect for gift giving or for adding a sentimental touch to your home. And just like the Victorians, I made all of these using simple and inexpensive items that I had around the house. So, let's get started. Here is a list of the characteristics of Victorian Valentines that inspired today's projects. For the first project, cut out simple flower shapes from a page torn from an old book. You can easily cut these shapes out by hand, but I used my Cricut to save time. Gather together some buttons in various colors and some green florist wire. Then run the wire through a hole in first a large button and then a smaller button. Bend the wire and run it back through different holes in both buttons. Pull the wire taut and twist it a little bit underneath the large button. Cut off the extra wire from the short end and then cut the long piece of wire to your desired length. Run the end of the wire through one of your paper flowers and add a dot of hot glue to attach it to the underside of the large button. To create a base for your flowers, drill small holes in a scrap piece of wood. Add a drop of super glue into each hole to hold the flowers firmly in place. I taped another vintage book page to a piece of cardstock and then ran it through my printer, printing on it the words "Love Grows Here," which I cut out and adhered to a piece of cardboard using glue stick. I like to use cardboard from old cereal boxes, but you could use a popsicle stick instead. Use a little wood glue to adhere the cardboard to the side of the wood scrap. For the next project, let's make some little Valentine notebooks that you can give as gifts. I found some small Dollar Tree notebooks left over from another project and then printed out vintage Valentine images to fit on their covers. I printed them out on regular notebook paper, cut them out, and adhered them to the front of the notebooks using glue stick. Victorians were all about embellishments, so I couldn't just leave these plain. I used a gold paint pen to make highlights on the cover of one of the notebooks, and I hot glued on a small piece of lace to another. And for this anatomical heart, I brushed on a little Mod Podge in a few areas and then sprinkled on some red glitter. You could leave the notebooks plain inside, or you could write a message to your loved one. Paper garlands were especially popular during the Victorian era, and I thought it would be particularly appropriate to make one using pages taken from a vintage book of poetry. Because the paper was thin and delicate, I cut these hearts out by hand rather than using my Cricut machine. To dress up these hearts, I cut out some small floral transfers that I had left over from a different project. You just rub them a bit with the provided utensil to adhere the image to the paper heart. Then, running hot glue along the edge of one heart, I adhered two hearts together, leaving a small opening along one side. I put a little stuffing from an old pillow inside the heart, using a pencil to help me spread it out. Then I hot glued the small opening closed. I made 10 hearts altogether, And then I spread them out evenly on a strand of jute twine, clipping them on using those tiny clothespins from Dollar Tree. For extra embellishment, I strung a few beads in between each of the paper hearts. The pink beads are actually red beads that I soaked in a cup of bleach for an hour. To create a Valentine's pillow, I started with a white pillow sham that I purchased at Goodwill several months ago. I cut off the 2 pieces of fabric on the back side of the sham, saving the large front piece for another project. I took the top piece of fabric, folded it in half, and drew on half of a heart. Then I cut out the heart shape with my scissors. I lost some of the video footage for this project, but I cut out several small rectangles of fabric from scraps that I had on hand. I pinned the small scraps in 5 vertical rows across the front of the heart, and then on my sewing machine I ran 1 line of stitching straight down each of the 5 vertical rows. Next, I pin the heart face down on the second piece of fabric that I cut from the back of the pillow sham. I sewed along the edge of the heart, leaving an opening just large enough for my hand to fit through. I cut off the extra fabric and then turned the heart right side out. I decided to toss it in the dryer for a few minutes to wrinkle up the little fabric scraps. I filled the heart with stuffing from an old pillow, and then I hand-stitched the opening closed. But you could stitch the opening on your machine or even use hot glue to close it up. Now let's make some small fabric hearts that can be used in so many different ways. I like to cut a paper heart in half for my pattern. Then I fold my piece of fabric over and pin the pattern along the fold and cut out my heart. Then, with right sides facing inward, I pin 2 hearts together and sew along the edge on my sewing machine, leaving a small opening. Then I turn it right side out and use a pencil to help me get it back into shape. I fill it with a little stuffing, and then for these, I usually just use a little hot glue to close the opening. I wanted to add a few fabric hearts to a floral arrangement, and so I began filling this enamel teapot with some faux greenery and flowers that were all originally purchased at the thrift store. To add the fabric hearts to the arrangement, I stuck the pointy end of a skewer stick through the bottom of the fabric heart. The stuffing holds the stick in place, so I didn't add any glue, and that way I can take the hearts off the sticks in the future if I want to repurpose the hearts for another project. It wouldn't be a Canterbury Cottage Valentine video if I didn't repurpose a clock, so here it is. I removed the screws from the back and then popped out the battery-operated clock mechanism. The wood tone was very red, so I gave it a couple coats of an ivory chalk paint, and when the paint was dry, I lightly distressed the edges with 220 grit sandpaper. I cut a piece of cereal box cardboard to fit the back side of the clock, and then I adhered a small piece of floral scrapbook paper to the cardboard using glue stick. Then I adhered the cardboard to the back side of the clock using hot glue. I made a small ring of angel hair vine and used some florist wire to hold the vine in its shape. Then I hot glued the small ring of vine into the clock opening. I found a small white ceramic bird in my stash with a clip on the bottom. I pulled the clip off with pliers and then hot glued the bird onto the angel hair vine inside the clock. Then I hot glued a little Spanish moss around the bird to give the effect of a bird nest. I found a small wood green heart in my stash and used a bit of glue stick to adhere a small piece of lace over the heart to give it more of a vintage look. I ran a piece of thread through a small hole at the top of the wood heart and then hot glued the opposite end of the thread to the bird's beak. I used Scrabble letters to spell out the word love across the bottom of the clock. Then I cut out a few more flowers from the scrapbook paper and used Mod Podge to adhere them to the top corner of the clock. I applied some hot glue to the back of the scrapbook paper that protruded over the clock opening. This would reinforce it and keep it from bending. I think the easiest way to repurpose old candles is to melt them down in a pan in an oven set at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Once they're melted, you can add a few drops of fragrance oil or a bit of crayon to change the color if you want. I added a small piece of red crayon to create a pink ombre effect on some white taper candles. I applied the pink wax to the bottom 2/3 of each candle and then let that wax solidify for a couple minutes. And then I applied more pink wax, this time just to the bottom 1/3 of each candle. I found a small candelabra in my stash that I thought would be perfect for my pink taper candles, but I didn't care for the color, so I gave it a couple coats of an ivory chalk paint. For this next project, I spray painted the lid and base of an old rusty tin. Then I printed out some vintage Valentine images in sizes large enough to fit inside the tin. I traced around the tin on the back of the copy paper and then cut out the images in the heart shapes. I used glue stick to adhere the Valentine images inside the two heart-shaped tins. Then I began adding embellishments with hot glue. I used some pearl ribbon along the inside edge of one of the tins and added a few faux flowers and ribbon along one side. I also stained a popsicle stick with some antiquing wax and added a small transfer with French words. I trimmed the ends off the popsicle stick and hot glued it inside the tin. Then I hot glued a magnet to the back of the tin. For the second tin, I printed out a tiny note that says, "I love you with all my heart." I rolled it up and tied it with black thread, and then used a needle to run the thread through the cork of a small glass bottle from Dollar Tree. To attach the bottle to the tin, I drilled a small hole in the top of the heart and then ran the thread through that hole and tied a knot at the top. As a finishing touch, I hot glued some miniature pom-pom trim around the edge and added a bow to the top. I often find glass and ceramic animal-shaped candle holders at thrift stores and think that they make wonderful planters for faux flowers. I had this clear glass cat and white ceramic bird in my stash. The hole in the bird was quite small, meant for a taper candle, but I was still able to fit a small piece of styrofoam in it. For the cat, I filled the hole with half of a moss-covered styrofoam rock. Then I just began adding various scraps of faux greenery and flowers to create interesting arrangements. I actually have a tub full of small floral scraps left over from other projects. To make these floral arrangements more Valentine specific, I printed out some vintage Valentine images on cardstock in a very small size. After cutting them out, I hot glued a small craft stick to the back of the Valentine and then stuck it into the floral arrangement. For this next project, you could use a vintage image, or you could make a black and white copy of one of your own photos. Start by cutting a heart shape from a piece of cereal box cardboard. Then print out your chosen picture in a size large enough to cover the front of your heart. Adhere it to the cardboard using glue stick. To create the appearance of a picture frame, hot glue buttons around the edge of the heart. Print out a romantic phrase or cut a few lines from a favorite poem. If you like, you can age the paper by brushing a little antiquing wax around the edges. You might also want to glue the paper to a bit of cardboard for extra stability. Hot glue your verse to the front of the heart. I also use glue stick to adhere some other poems to the back of the heart. Hot glue on a lacy bow if you like. To make a stand for the button frame, I hot glued one end of a small dowel rod into an old thread spool and then hot glued the other end of the dowel rod to the back of the heart. To keep the back of the heart looking neat, I cut out another poem and hot glued it over the dowel rod. And to finish it off, I wrapped the spool with a small piece of lace and a small piece cut from an old doily. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching today. And if you want more Valentine ideas, here's another video you may like.